Imagine this. You're behind the wheel, or maybe just walking home, and a police officer stops you and says just 4 words. I can smell cannabis. What you do in the next 30 seconds decides everything that follows. You can stay composed, know your rights, and give away nothing you don't have to. Or you can hand that officer far more than they were ever legally owed. Most people choose the second option without even realizing it. They panic. They start justifying themselves. They get defensive and argue. Or, most often, they simply freeze and let it happen, convinced that the moment the word cannabis is spoken, they've lost all control of the situation. Here's the one fact almost nobody knows. A smell by itself is not supposed to be enough to justify a search. Not according to me, according to the police's own official guidance. Stick with me, and by the end of this, you'll understand exactly what the law says, and exactly what to say the moment someone claims they can smell cannabis on you. I'm a criminal defence solicitor in England and Wales, and after 15 years standing beside people during some of the worst moments of their lives, I can tell you the cannabis smell stop is one of the most common and most misunderstood encounters people have with the police. Countless people have given up their rights and sometimes their freedom over this exact scenario, simply because no one ever explained the truth to them. So let me be the one to do that. Picture a young man, we'll call him Danny, driving home one evening. He hasn't broken any laws. He gets pulled over for something minor, maybe a faulty brake light, and the officer leans toward the window and says, "I can smell cannabis in here." Maybe there's a smell. Maybe there isn't. Maybe it's from a friend he gave a lift to earlier, or an air freshener, or nothing at all. But Danny panics. He starts rambling. No, I don't smoke. Well, my mate does, but not in my car, I swear." In under a minute of nervous chatter, Danny has done the officer's job for him. He's confirmed that cannabis is part of his world, made himself sound guilty, and now he's about to be searched on the pavement in front of everyone. All because of a single sniff. Danny hadn't done anything wrong, but he threw away every advantage he had, because nobody ever told him that a bare claim of smell is actually one of the weakest justifications an officer can offer, not the strongest. This is exactly why I'm making this video, so you never become Danny. Let's start with the actual legal power at play, because you need to understand its limits. Police do have authority to search someone for drugs, and it comes from Section 23 of the Misuse of Drugs Act. Like most stop and search powers, it hinges entirely on one requirement: reasonable grounds to suspect that a person is in possession of a controlled substance. We keep coming back to those 2 words, reasonable grounds, because they're the foundation everything else rests on. The officer needs an actual objective reason to suspect that specific individual, and just like with any other search, that reason can never be based on someone's race, age, clothing, or the fact that they happen to be in an area police consider suspicious. It has to be grounded in something real. So the real question is, does "I can smell cannabis" alone meet that bar? And surprisingly, according to the police's own national guidance, the answer is no. Let me repeat that, because it's the core of everything I'm telling you today, and it's the thing officers are counting on you not knowing. The College of Policing, which sets the professional standards officers are trained on, states clearly that the smell of cannabis on its own does not amount to reasonable grounds for a search. Their guidance explicitly warns against basing a search on any single factor in isolation, smell included. This isn't some obscure legal theory of mine. The Metropolitan Police have had this exact policy on the books since 2013, stating that smell alone is insufficient grounds. The police watchdog echoed this back in 2022. An independent oversight panel repeated it again in 2024. Some police forces have gone so far as to formally train officers that the smell of cannabis, by itself, is not a valid basis to stop and search anyone. So when an officer treats the word cannabis as a master key that unlocks an automatic search, their own rulebook actually disagrees with them. Now, to be completely fair, I don't want you walking away with only half the story. That's exactly how people get themselves into trouble. None of this means police can never search someone in a cannabis-related situation. It means smell alone can't be the entire basis. If there's a smell plus something else, someone visibly passing an item, prior intelligence, something in plain sight, or genuinely suspicious behaviour, those combined factors can add up to lawful grounds. The official guidance even lists questions officers are supposed to ask themselves before searching. Can this smell realistically be linked to this specific person? How likely is it that a search will actually turn up something? Is my suspicion genuinely objective? So the rule isn't that police can never search for drugs. It's that a standalone claim of "I smell weed" with nothing else backing it up is a search built on very shaky legal ground. Exactly the kind of search that tends to get thrown out later. There are two more weaknesses worth understanding, because they're precisely what the guidance is concerned about. The first is what's officially called attribution. Essentially, whose smell is it really? Think about it. You might be in a car with 3 other passengers, or walking past a doorway through a lingering cloud someone else left behind. A smell doesn't come with a name tag. It can't tell an officer, on its own, that the drug belongs to you specifically, rather than the person sitting next to you, someone who passed by minutes earlier, or even a borrowed jacket. That's exactly why the guidance instructs officers to ask whether the smell can genuinely be attributed to that particular person, because very often it simply can't. If you're one of 4 people in a car, and the officer wants to search you specifically because the car smells, that's an extremely weak justification. The second weakness has grown significantly in recent years. Not everything that smells like cannabis actually is cannabis. Legal hemp products, CBD flower and CBD oils and vapes, are sold openly on the high street, and they can smell nearly identical to illegal cannabis to the average person's nose, especially outdoors. There's no way for a nose alone to distinguish a legal product from an illegal one. That means a smell alone doesn't even reliably confirm that any crime has occurred at all, and you are entirely within your rights to point that out calmly, noting that what they're smelling could easily be something perfectly legal. None of this makes smell meaningless as evidence, but it does make it a thin and unreliable basis for something as invasive as a search. Now let's turn all of this into something you can actually use, because this is the part that protects you. First, understand the fundamental rule underneath everything. If a search is genuinely lawful, you cannot refuse it. You can't physically block it, and if you try, resisting can become an offence in itself, giving the officer legal grounds to use reasonable force. So I will never advise you to physically resist a search on the street. That only makes things worse. What I will give you instead is something far more useful. Calm, precise language that forces the officer to justify their actions, protects you from making the situation worse, and sets you up to win afterward if the search turns out to have been unlawful. Here's exactly what to say, spoken evenly and politely, with no hostility, because aggression is exactly what they're hoping to provoke. First, state clearly, "I do not consent to being searched." This won't stop a lawful search, but it matters enormously, because if their only basis really was a smell, you haven't given them anything extra to lean on. They have to rely purely on their actual legal power and grounds. Second, ask the one question that gets straight to the point. What are your grounds for this search, beyond the smell? Said calmly, this single sentence shows the officer you understand the rules and invites them to state, out loud, whatever else they might have. If the honest answer is nothing beyond the smell, then what you're witnessing is a search that the police's own guidance says shouldn't be happening, and every second of it strengthens your position later. Third, you're entitled to certain information before any search, and you should ask for it directly. The grounds for the search, what they're looking for, which legal power they're using, the officer's name and station, and, critically, a written record of the search. Get that record. It's the single most valuable thing you can walk away with because it locks in their own words, exactly what grounds they claimed to have. And here's the mistake that turns a search into a conviction. Don't start explaining yourself, and don't answer questions about it. If they ask, "Have you been smoking? Whose is it? What do you have on you?" you are under no legal obligation to answer any of that. Answering is often how people talk themselves into real trouble. A nervous, "Well, I had a bit earlier," but is a gift you're handing them. You can remain completely polite while simply not engaging. I've got nothing further to say about that. You don't owe anyone an explanation, and a claimed smell doesn't create one. And whatever happens, don't fall for the softer version of the same trap. "Do you mind if I just have a quick look?" Because that's a request, not a legal power. Say yes to that, and you've just consented to the very search the law was supposed to make them justify. Don't give it away. So what if, after all this, they search you anyway? Let it happen calmly, without resisting. Hands visible, no drama. Because that's the golden rule of this whole situation. Comply in the moment, challenge it afterward. And this isn't weakness, it's strategy. If that search was based solely on a smell, with nothing else supporting it, then you were just searched on grounds that the police's own national guidance says are insufficient. If nothing was found, you now have a legitimate complaint about an unlawful search, and forces have genuinely been held accountable for exactly this kind of thing. And if it escalates further, a search built on weak grounds is exactly the kind of thing a good solicitor can challenge. Evidence obtained from an unlawful search can be excluded entirely, but you only get there if you stayed calm, kept quiet about the details, and walked away with that written record, not if you turned it into a shouting match that ends in an obstruction charge. Let me make "challenge it afterward" concrete, because people often assume it's vague or hopeless. It isn't. As soon as the encounter ends and you're somewhere safe, write down everything while it's still fresh. The time, the location, the officers' names or badge numbers, exactly what grounds they stated, and specifically whether they mentioned anything beyond the smell. Hold on to that written record. You're entitled to it, and you can request a copy afterward, even if you didn't receive one on the spot. If you believe the search was unjustified, you have real options. You can file a formal complaint with the police force, which they're obligated to address. If it's serious, or if you're brushed off, it can be escalated to the independent police watchdog. And if anything came of the search, an arrest, a charge, tell your solicitor immediately that the whole thing started with nothing but a claimed smell, because that's precisely the kind of argument that gets evidence excluded and cases dismissed. None of this is hypothetical. Police forces have issued apologies, paid compensation, and lost cases over searches that rested on nothing more than a sniff. But every one of those outcomes depended on the person staying calm, keeping details to themselves, and walking away with the facts documented. Your composure in the moment is quiet compliance. Your leverage afterward is the paper trail. I want to explain briefly why this matters beyond any single encounter, because I think it's genuinely important. The cannabis smell search has drawn criticism for years at the highest levels, precisely because it's so easy to invoke and nearly impossible to prove or disprove after the fact. Nobody can go back and verify a smell. It's also fallen disproportionately on certain communities, who get stopped far more often than others. That imbalance is a major reason the guidance was tightened in the first place. So understanding this isn't just a clever trick, it's you holding a power to its proper legal limits, calmly, in real time, which is exactly what the law intends to allow. If you want the complete picture, knowing exactly when a search is lawful and when it isn't, the precise wording to use, and how to challenge a search that's crossed the line, that's the kind of guidance worth having close at hand whenever you need it. So let's bring this together. When an officer says, "I can smell cannabis," recognize it for what it actually is, a claim, not a magic phrase, and one that, according to the police's own rules, is not enough on its own. Remember 4 things. 1. Stay calm and clearly say, I do not consent to being searched. 2. Ask the question that shows you know the law. What are your grounds beyond the smell? 3. Don't explain yourself, don't answer their questions, and never agree to a quick look. 4. If they search you anyway, let them, without resisting, but get the written record and challenge it afterward. A search built on nothing but a smell is exactly the kind of search that falls apart under real scrutiny. Comply in the moment, win the argument later. Because here's the truth of it. In that moment, the officer is banking on you not knowing the rule. They're counting on the word cannabis doing all the work for them. The single most powerful thing you can do is stay calm and, in one quiet sentence, show them that you already know a smell isn't enough. That one sentence changes the entire encounter. I'm Adam King. Know your rights, because the people who understand them are the ones who walk away.